Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/flexibilityworks.
CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw, coming to you at the end of 2024. We're going to do a special year-end review, recap of some of the top stories, and how maybe a little bit about how our opinions have evolved since these massive moments in BC politics throughout the year. In an election year, there was no shortage of topics for the panel and myself to choose from. Want to start off, though, with some sad news. Friend of the show, Dan Coulter, the former MLA for Chilliwack, the incoming provincial director for the BC NDP, passed away today as we're recording this Friday. News of his passing out at the age of 49. He had been hospitalized earlier in the month with a heart attack. He was the Minister of State for Transportation and Infrastructure, and a really good guy. I've been doing this for entering my 17th year, and there's not many people who are kind and funny, optimistic, who are friendly, who make friends across party lines. And I know a lot of folks have been really devastated to hear of his passing and his health challenges. So we wanted to extend our condolences to his friends and his family and folks who have worked with him. Jeff, you knew Dan better than any of us. What goes through your mind on a tragic case like this?
Well, I'm really sad. Many have drunk from the cup of misfortune and carried a bitter taste for the rest of their lives. And if there's anyone who had cause to be bitter, it was Dan. A horrific workplace accident took him from walking on his own 2 feet to life in a wheelchair. But bitterness is not how Dan rolled. Despite the challenges he faced in his life, he reached heights most of us can only dream of. He was, like you said, Rob, joyful, optimistic, funny. I got to know Dan really well because of this show. Many of you at home like to remind me that I'm a bit of a goof, and some of you may have a point. But every week I could count on Dan to send me a note that made me laugh. So, Rob, that time then when we debated ICBC's financial accounting, Dan told me I was right and said that it was time for you to sign up for Sprott Shaw classes.
He was a very kind man.
It wasn't all bad. It wasn't all bad. When we talked about the legislature cat idea, he took the ideas to the speaker actually and fought for them, but later confided to me that it didn't happen because Raj Shoham thought getting a cat would alienate half of BC. Dan admitted he wanted to be a DJ because of WKRP in Cincinnati and wondered aloud how I managed to make so many Leave It to Beaver references, given that I'm not old enough to have watched it. And one time when things weren't going so great, he just said, "I think you're a good dude, Jeff." So Dan's with the Angels now, and those of us who knew him will be sad and mourn his loss. But I hope we can also honor his spirit by embracing the joy he brought into our lives. He lived his life with purpose, kindness, and humor. He gave us joy, and let's carry that until our paths cross again. Long live Dan Coulter. There will never be another.
Well said. And you're right. He was a friend of the show. He would stop me in the hall and say that he enjoyed it. He'd go on social media and say how much he loved this podcast. And I think he would want us to carry on and talk about whatever we were going to talk about on a given week. This week being hi, Ophelia wanted to say something as well there. This week being the year-end review, and it was quite a year. We had an election, we had parties folding, we had people losing seats, careers ending, all sorts of drama. We had major political figures passing away, unfortunately. Lots of things occurred this year. So we're going to go around and talk a bit about them. Allie, so many things to choose from here. What kind of percolates in your mind as a kind of top story, and has your opinion of it the way you view it kind of evolved a little bit since we would have talked about it on the show, whatever it is, earlier this year?
I feel like we all lived 10 political lives this past year, that it was really hard to kind of pick one or two things that happened that changed the trajectory of this province. There's a ton of stuff that happened. I think, let me start off with, we started off the year with a bit of a disastrous budget. It has a massive deficit, but we quickly shifted into this very dramatic political period that we forgot about it. And so certainly I did. And so then we moved into the BC United rejected by the public. They were officially the opposition, but the polling consistently started to come out that they were in third place. And then their public support's just dwindling down. Then we go into the summer months. It's getting a little bit warmer. The BC United hosted their longstanding event of Beans and Jeans, which in my opinion was the final deception, because it was that at that same time that Kevin Falcon was having conversations to suspend the campaign and essentially hand over the keys to John Rustad. And then
he's taking people's money on the stage at Beans and Jeans.
With the bouncy castles in the background, and everything's just so happy.
He knows the party is going to be wound down. Yeah.
It was like, give that man an Oscar, because he was lying to everyone. And then the election happened, and the draft of 2024, as the BC United suspended their campaign, and the BC Conservatives then had to pick up potentially some of those candidates. And that's a moment there where we can pause and say, what would have happened if they picked different people? How their start for the BC Conservatives would have been potentially a little bit different, because the news stories were, Shirley Bond unfairly kicked out, people like Jackie Taggart and Coralie Oakes, who are hard workers and didn't get those opportunities. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Corinne Kirkpatrick, who essentially said, no, I'm still going to do this. And then it started the biggest group of independent candidates during the election. And then I'll close it off with the Kevin Falcon Witness Protection Program, because we have not seen or heard from him since the dissolving of the campaign. And I'm curious if, we'll get a holiday greeting from him sometime this month, but I doubt it. But the party did put out an email asking for money at least. So we know he's somewhere back there.
That was quite an email this week saying, hey, if we don't step up and give us some money, we might cease to exist. And you're like, what? You're still here? You need money? Jillian, the two kind of points Allie made there about the collapse of BC United and how it happened, and then had the collapse happen differently, or the Conservatives picked differently, how different a year we might have had.
Yeah, I certainly think it's not difficult to imagine, had that draft gone differently, that we could have a Conservative government, just given how close the margins were, for two reasons. I think, we've got now this sort of cancel caucus that sort of represents the more controversial, inflammatory members of the Conservatives that I think probably flipped some votes in the NDP favor in some of those close seats. And then as well as the independent candidates that Allie mentioned that took votes away from the sort of the right in a number of ridings. So it's so interesting to be able to have such a clear example in politics of a fork in the road where a leader made a decision that could have gone differently and potentially had a different outcome. Really fascinating. Yeah,
and even if the same thing had happened earlier, still might have just allowed for more time to, for better or for worse, I guess, kind of give the public that adjustment to the Conservatives and their candidates. Jeff, those two kind of points on a year like this, we'll look back on them as kind of what ifs.
I will say this, 2024 proved right when I said that Eleanor Sturko should take over the leadership of BC United and that Kevin Falcon should be showed the door. People thought I was being silly. It was 2 years of advocacy on my part. I was trying to help them, and they didn't listen. And where are they now? Kevin Falcon's in hiding. They got no money. They got no MLAs. They're going to cease to exist. So chalk up one for Ferrier on that.
Maybe they might. Who knows? 2025, somebody takes the burnt husk of United and cleans off the BC Liberal name. Maybe, you never know.
You want to place a wager on that?
No,
let's move on.
Wagers. Yeah.
And I don't buy the draft analysis here. I don't think a draft would have worked because the grassroots of the Conservatives wouldn't have countenanced a more centrist slate of candidates. We're seeing it now with the blowback against Eleanor Sturko, 13 MLAs putting in writing that they want her to apologize publicly. John Rustad ambushing her on social media, not giving her heads up that he agreed with the 13 MLAs over the person who he recruited to the party, and really opened the floodgates for more BC United folks to come into the party. I think if by chance they'd won the election because of this draft, it would be a bigger implosion, like we're seeing right now with the kind of the more moderate and the more grassroots focused social, cultural Conservatives who are calling the shots, it looks like, and pushing away the Sturkos and Millibars and Halfords of the world.
Let's stay with you, Jeff. What story jumps out at you for your story of the year?
Well, there's many. The NDP won the election. We had an election this year, and the NDP won it. That seems like a big deal.
But yes.
It was close. It was too close for comfort, but they won it. And David Eby secured his own mandate from British Columbians, a slim mandate. John Horgan, the best NDP premier British Columbia ever saw, died too young at 65. It was interesting to see a lot of BC's housing moves embraced by provincial leaders elsewhere in the country. That was interesting. And now we're looking at a big, ugly tariff war, which makes everything else on affordability and public safety and housing and healthcare look like a walk in the park to solve. So that'll be interesting. But for me, it was how the big story was how the BC Conservatives have really changed the foundation of politics in British Columbia. And they did it by, in my view, definitely harnessing the anger of those who are disillusioned by all of the issues we've talked about this year: housing, unaffordability, healthcare struggles, public safety. And they did it by redirecting the anger toward cultural and social grievances. And it's a playbook that's worked well pretty much everywhere it's been tried in North America and Europe in recent years. It's like a sleight of hand. You blame progressive policies or urban elites, and that's been rallying the frustrated without, in my view, addressing the root cause, which is the rich getting richer, the poor getting poorer. And this is driven not by cultural elites in Vancouver, but by the super rich. And it's also, but this is also a criticism, a critique of the left, because they have failed to meet this anger with a compelling alternative. Instead of going hard at the economic issues, they've ceded ground. They've left a vacuum that Rustad's filled with moralistic narratives, and it's like the Andy Griffith show where Andy, the sheriff, might keep the peace in Mayberry, but it's completely ignoring that the real power lies elsewhere, and Mayberry's changing. So the challenge for progressives this year, in my view, is to stop playing Andy, patching over symptoms, and instead get focused on the true antagonists, greed and inequality, that create these crises in the first place, and take the momentum away from the Conservatives. We'll see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll see. Allie or Jillian, either of you want to jump in on that?
I'd say this. I think in an analysis of what happened with the NDP this year, we're grasping at straws to figure out what they did well this year, and that's mostly because they barely won this election. Even Premier David Eby said at the Premier luncheon, from what I understand, that he is like escaped death or something along those lines. Or
a near-death experience brings focus to one's mind. Yes,
you know that this campaign was basically on life support because they failed to connect with voters in a way that anyone could really take them seriously. And so, my point being that in a year summary of what the NDP did, what did they do? Sure, Jeff, they created a ton of housing policy, and I will commend them on the fact that they threw everything out there to see what could potentially work.
The Globe and Mail endorsed them on that. The Globe and Mail.
Good.
Well, that's a stretch.
Okay, wait.
The red NBC Globe and Mail.
Yes, exactly. Jillian, let's jump over to you and hear your kind of thoughts of the high points of the year.
Yeah, well, I think, just on the NDP, the closeness of the election was going to be one of mine. I think it's the closest election that we've ever had, pretty much. And those recounts and all of the drama that kind of went into not knowing, the shape of the government for so many weeks after the election. I think, it was really interesting, the NDP's year. They were on their back foot for most of it. We had them backtracking, revoking the Land Act legislation. And then just before the election, we had EB walk back on decriminalization, which was, a big government policy. I think that was definitely one of the biggest stories of the year. The retreat on that issue after all of the noise made by the Conservatives on public safety and public drug use. And then I think, and then also the flip flop on the carbon tax, of course. And then, going into an election where they really didn't have much of a platform and kind of just sort of faltered. I think in BC politics, governing parties, the opposition often loses the election more than the governing party wins it, probably just as often or even more often. And I think that's kind of what happened here. It's kind of hard to read the tea leaves of what the next 4 years are going to look like because the NDP didn't have a super strong platform. We don't have mandate letters yet. We're probably going to get an agreement from the Greens coming imminently, which might give us a little bit more meat of like what the NDP strategy going into the next 4 years is going to be. But yeah, it kind of felt like a little bit like everybody was a little bit lost. And like Jeff said, we had a lot of noise and distractions rather than, I think, discussions on ideas about how to solve the biggest issues that people are facing.
It does feel like we also, and maybe we didn't quite appreciate it at the moment on election night when all of us were there, but on the Greens, we've seen a kind of like new Greens emerge, right? I mean, on election night, it was like, oh, the Greens held 2 seats, so therefore they continue. But it wasn't Sonia Furstenau. Mm-hmm. It was 2 new MLAs, and it means something different maybe than we thought at the time, I think.
Yeah, I think they've been pretty quiet while they've been doing these negotiations. I think kind of figuring out behind the scenes what their next chapter looks like. Sonia Furstenau talked about sort of a passing of the torch. I think her decision to run in Beacon Hill is another one of those critical inflection points that, we could kind of game out what would have happened. It was a difficult decision. Her old riding got split. And of course, the riding that, where she lived in Shawnigan Lake was one of those ridings that went to a recount that was really, really close between the Conservatives and the NDP. So who knows what would have happened if she had run there. Maybe she would have come up the middle. Maybe the Conservatives would have gotten the seat. And now, the Greens are looking at a new future. She hasn't made any announcements about her plans, but we do know she's not the other MLAs aren't going to step down for her to run in one of those seats. So it could be that we're looking at a change in leadership for them. We're still kind of getting to know those new MLAs or knowing if someone else is going to come and run in that contest. I think, the Greens, because they had that breakthrough election in 2017 there, and then, there was the snap election that was, kind of done under duress. I think so much of their identity had kind of been driven by the events of 2017 and their relationship with the NDP and the minority government. And now it really is a new chapter. It's going to be interesting to see what's in an agreement, what those new MLAs prioritized, and the kind of brand that they want to champion.
We do have, and we'll talk about this next week. We're recording the show now where there is a deal just announced by the Premier with the NDP and the BC Greens to deliver some stability on some shared priorities. The actual 8-page agreement is just going online now. We're doing our year-end show, but we'll come back to that next week. But you're right, Jillian. It brings the Greens back into a bit more of the spotlight of things that they might be talking about after this period of quietness and what happens with Sonia Furstenau as well. Just before we go here, anyone think that, and I know we debated this on election night, that we're going to have a 4-year government? Is anyone still thinking 4-year government? Is anyone, or are we still there? I see a nod from Jillian. Allie,
I'm optimistic.
Jeff?
I'm optimistic.
Yeah.
I think so. I think we're going to end up with 4 years. It's the same with the general election. I think a lot of people will try to trigger an early election, but it'll be tough to. And if the Conservatives are smart, they will probably follow Pierre Poilievre's footsteps in trying to trigger an election, knowing that it's just a political stunt.
Mm-hmm. And yet, we've already seen with health challenges for Grace Lohr, for example, that 1-seat majority can be put in peril very quickly. Now with a Green Deal, with 2 extra votes year by year, who knows? But I remember on election night, all of us going, holy man, the uncertainty, could we be in another election? And here we are closing out the year, and I agree. It's
all I got to say is just because there's a lot of negativity coming from Allie and Jillian talking about weak platforms and disastrous budgets. Got to say, though, that
don't give us
yeah, thanks. There you go. I repeated the negatives, which you're never supposed to do.
Yeah.
And yet the NDP won the election. And
Barely.
And we won. It was a victory. And yet the Greens have chosen to decide to work with the NDP. And so that says to me that there's, people generally, despite their concerns, a lot of British Columbians said we like the direction they're going on hiring doctors and nurses. We like what they're doing on housing. They need to do better, but directionally they're going in the right direction, and we're behind them. And wow, what a miss for the opposition to beat the NDP if they were doing so badly.
All right, I have words for the podcast.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with that either, but we will leave it there.
There's no podcast this week. They're canceled.
Thank you to the panel for being here all year. We do have one more show in the year, but just want to say thank you for keeping us on our toes and informed all year with your great analysis. And we will be back one more show before the end of the year next week here on Political Capital. Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/flexibilityworks.